All right, here we go. Welcome into the show. You're watching Philadelphia Eagles Now. Chase Senior here with you. And as always, no matter where you are, how you're tuned in, thank you so much for making today's show a part of your day. Hope you're all having a fantastic weekend here on this Sunday, February 1st, as February is already underway. We have some breaking news coming up on this edition of Philadelphia Eagles Now on defensive coordinator Vic Fangio. We'll dive into that, but a couple of things off the top. A programming reminder, I'm flying to the Bay Area tomorrow for Chat Sports' coverage of Super Bowl 60. I'll be doing shows from Radio Row all throughout the week in San Francisco, bringing you high-level Eagles coverage. At the end of February going into March, I'll be in Indianapolis for the NFL Combine. Right after that, NFL free agency a couple weeks into March. Then after that, NFL draft at the end of April. As I've said here on the show, the NFL, the business model is booming, and it's really become a year-round sport at this point. And that's why doing what I do is an absolute blast and why I wake up every day blessed to talk about the Birds. Huge offseason coming up. I've got you covered every step of the way. And then another thing, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Of course, give me a follow on social media at Chase_Senior on X, Instagram, and TikTok. We're reaching millions of people every single month here on the channel. I'm reaching millions of people on my social media pages. And for all the fellas out there, I have to plug this. We started talking about this the other day. Valentine's Day is coming up. We have crew neck sweatshirts and shirts married into this Philadelphia Eagles football. And let me put the link up as well so that you can see what we're talking about here. Eagles Valentine's Day gear is available for you right now. Fellas, get your lady something special at chatsports.com/EaglesVDay. Now, the crew neck sweatshirts are unisex, male, female. You can both wear it. The shirts are for the ladies out there. And with Valentine's Day coming up, fellas, she might not have been a born and raised Philadelphia Eagles fan, but she married into this just like you're married to the game of being an Eagles fan. This Valentine's Day, get her this super comfortable women's t-shirt or sweatshirt so the world knows that she's a ride or die for Philadelphia football just like you. Grab a t-shirt for her or a sweatshirt for her to make her happy for this Valentine's Day coming up. So it's chatsports.com/EaglesVDay. Here's the link once again, chatsports.com/EaglesVDay. I'm going to make the pinned comment the link to that right now. So get yourselves and your lady some Eagles Valentine's gear right now. All right. So the other day, we talked about this on Eagles Now, right? And I don't even have any notes. We're just diving right into it, and then we'll get to the report from Jimmy Kempski as we're often running here on the show. So the other day, we talked about what Adam Schefter said on 97.5 The Fanatic when he was on with Andrew Salchunas and John Kincaid, both friends of the show. I actually got some breakfast at the start of this year with John Kincaid at Market Street Grill in Westchester. That's where I'm from. He's currently living there. And we were talking about the Fanatic. We were talking about the Eagles Sports Broadcasting, Temple University, because we both went there. And obviously, we still keep in touch. And so I saw this clip starting to go viral, and I texted John about this. But Adam Schefter was about to sign off when he was doing his guest spot, because I think he goes on every single week on 97.5 The Fanatic on that morning show. And he's like, yeah, on top of the Eagles hiring an offensive coordinator, maybe there will be some big news outside of that to talk about next week with the Eagles. And so Salchunas is like, yeah, maybe an A.J. Brown trade. Now, that can't happen because a trade cannot take place until the start of the new league year in March. But then John Kincaid, who's known Shefty for a long time, stopped him and said, hold on. You can't just sign off and tease us with that big news that could potentially be coming and leave us with that cliffhanger. What are you talking about? And Shefty's like, yeah, maybe some big news is going to go down next week. And one of the theories that we talked about among the many theories that we are discussing for what Shefty could potentially be referencing, what he could be teasing or teeing up, is a retirement of defensive coordinator Vic Fangio. And it seems as though that's exactly what Adam Schefter was talking about. The other things that we were throwing around, an A.J. Brown trade. Again, it's impossible for that to happen. Could Jeff Stoutland, the Eagles offensive line coach, retire? According to Jeff McClain, he's going to be back in 2026, But at some point last year during the 2025 season, his responsibilities as far as being the run game coordinator and the offensive line coach were taken away from him. So he's expected to try to get this offensive line back on track and develop some of these young players, because the Eagles used 3 6-round picks on offensive linemen, Drew Kendall, Miles Hinton, and Cameron Williams, but he's not going to be the run game coordinator. Could it be a contract extension looming for a Jalen Carter, a Jordan Davis, or a Nolan Smith? That's possible. The Eagles have invested so much money on offense. They've drafted and developed on defense. But during Howie Roseman's end of the season press conference, he said that exactly. That now it's going to change pretty much. We're going to have to draft and develop on offense because we're expensive and getting older there. And we're going to have to hand out contract extensions on defense. And now the defensive side of the ball is going to be more expensive. Could the Eagles be building a new stadium? I think at some point here within the next decade, 15 years, Jeffrey Lurie, the Eagles owner, before at some point he potentially steps away as Eagles owner, he wants to build a brand new stadium, the house that Lurie built. And he's leaning toward building a stadium that has a retractable roof or a stadium that has a dome, because he wants Philadelphia to host a Super Bowl. And even though it's a cold weather climate, I think that Philadelphia as a Super Bowl host city would be a fantastic host city for a Super Bowl at some point. And all those things are possibilities at some point or another. But let's get back to Vic Fangio here. So I had told you on the show, I reached out to some people who are close to Fangio, have some ties to the Eagles organization. And as I told you the other night, I was told that Vic Fangio will most likely be back in 2026, but there is a possibility where he could retire. And so I relayed that news from what I've been gathering here on Eagles Now. And let me just check with another source who I reached out to this morning after I saw that report from Jimmy Kempski, and let me see if that source got back to me. Not yet. All right, so that's what I had the other day. Jimmy Kempski, who's been an Eagles beat writer for a really long time, from Philly Voice, had this to report this morning, and this is the breaking news that we want to get to here. According to multiple sources, the Philadelphia Eagles got a big scare recently when legendary defensive coordinator Vic Fangio informed the team that he was retiring from coaching in the NFL. Wow. However, Kempski added, sources said that Fangio was convinced by the team's brass to stay for at least one more season in 2026. For now, Fangio is back, though it should be noted that Philly Voice reached out to an Eagles spokesperson to confirm that Fangio is still the team's defensive coordinator, and they declined to answer until further notice. As such, wiggle room exists for Fangio to change his mind again. We'll get back to what Kempski also said, but let's pause to dissect that a little bit, because there are a couple of things that we have to hit on. Vic Fangio, after the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year and absolutely blitzed the Kansas City Chiefs, and when Vic Fangio put that marvelous defensive game plan together to force Patrick Mahomes into 3 turnovers, to sack him 6 times, and to be all over him throughout that entire Super Bowl 59 matchup in New Orleans, it was a great game plan. And that was his first Super Bowl. So Vic Fangio, one of the most legendary defensive coordinators in the history of the NFL, who's been coaching in the NFL for decades and decades, who got his start coaching under the legendary Jack Henzis from Dunmore High School. Jack Henzis was competing at the state level for state titles for a long time, decades ago, and Vic Fangio played under him. He went on to have, obviously, one of the best careers for any defensive coordinator ever. And after the Eagles won that Super Bowl last year, Vic Fangio, this is well documented, but some people might not know this, he was going up to people around the organization. He was saying, it's been a pleasure to work with you. It's been great working with you. And there was a belief that Fangio was going to retire after last year. Of course, he came back in 2025, and the Eagles once again had one of the best defenses in the sport, and they were the number 1 scoring defense after that Jalen Phillips trade, and all season long, they were a top 3 to 5 defense all across the board. Vic Fangio potentially retiring is a year-to-year situation at this point. He is 67 years old. He's going to be 68 on August 22nd. And so at some point here soon, Vic Fangio is going to retire. Is it going to be this year? Is it going to be next year? Who the hell knows? Obviously, he still has a lot of gas left in the tank. Obviously, he still has his fastball. But for the remainder of his life, at some point here soon, he's going to decide to retire so that he can walk off into the sunset, and he's probably going to be a Pro Football Hall of Famer. So that's one thing about this. The other thing, well, Chase, how could the Eagles let defensive backs coach Christian Parker go? And not only do they let him go, he goes to the Dallas Cowboys to be the defensive coordinator. Now, some people who I talked to them about this, right? And they said that Vic Fangio would never let Christian Parker go if he knew that he was going to retire. And I think that there's some truth into that. But also, if you're Christian Parker and you've got an opportunity to leave, and Vic Fangio and his future is clearly in limbo, and he hasn't made a firm decision on whether or not to come back in 2026, and Parker is offered the DC job for the Dallas Cowboys, with no promises that if Fangio does come back in 2026, that Christian Parker will be the DC in 2027, because who knows if Nick Sirianni will be the head coach next year. I don't blame Christian Parker for leaving to take the opportunity right now. He's worked himself into a position where he can be a DC for the Dallas Cowboys. It's a great opportunity that is very hard to pass up. The other thing, too, if Vic Fangio were to retire, the Eagles would go through an exhaustive interview process, just like they did for their offensive coordinator job, and there would be no promises that Christian Parker would be named defensive coordinator, unless Vic Fangio said, you must name Christian Parker DC. But the Eagles could look at the defensive coordinator market and say, we're a win-now team. Christian Parker's never called plays before. Sean Mannion's never called plays before. That's pretty risky to go into 2026 with a lot of unknowns at the coordinator spots. So what do we do here? We might want to go with a veteran DC. So I think that thought makes a lot of sense too. From Kemsky again. For now, Fangio is back, though it should be noted that Philly Voice reached out to an Eagles spokesperson to confirm that Fangio is still the team's defensive coordinator, and they declined to answer until further notice. As such, wiggle room exists for Fangio to change his mind again. In the interim between Fangio's short-lived retirement and his for-now decision to return, a source said that the Eagles reached out to former Eagles defensive coordinator Jonathan Gannon to gauge his interest in returning to the team should Fangio retire. Gannon had been fired as the Arizona Cardinals head coach earlier this offseason. He was then ultimately hired by the Green Bay Packers to be their defensive coordinator. So clearly Fangio approached the Eagles like a few weeks ago. And then there's this too from Kemsky. The Eagles were also at least planning to check on the availability of disgruntled Cleveland Browns defensive coordinator Jim Schwartz, who, like Gannon, was also formerly the Eagles defensive coordinator and who was reportedly unhappy about being passed over for the Browns' previously open head coaching job. So the Eagles clearly thought, man, we're going to lose Vic Fangio to retirement. I guess they convinced him to come back. Diana Russini reported just a little while ago on this Sunday that Fangio is expected to return in 2026, but there's still a scenario in which he could decide to step away. For a guy who loves football as much as he does, for a guy who grew up as a Philadelphia sports fan, who's from the Scranton-Dunmore area, it's probably hard after just winning a Super Bowl to just step away. It can take you a little while to grasp with the reality of retiring. What do I do with all that free time? Where am I going to move? What are my interests going to be? Because when you are a football coach, like, it is extremely crazy hours. These guys are probably popping a bunch of Adderall to try to get through a lot of days that are very long with sleepless nights or very little sleep. So your whole life is consumed by coaching. When you go from that rigorous schedule to being retired, we see people struggle with this all the time. What am I going to do post-retirement? Athletes really struggle with it. Coaches really struggle with it. That's why coaches get into either front office duties or they get into broadcasting. For me, if I couldn't talk on a microphone in front of a camera, I'd be itching at the bit to get back to the grind. I would be going crazy. And I want to do this until I'm in my 70s, maybe 80s, which is completely possible. So I imagine that thought process is going through Fangio's mind. It was also revealed by NFL Network's Mike Garafolo on Anthony Gargano's show on PHLY that Fangio nearly retired after the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year. Eagles fans are used to this, of course. There was the annual retire or not decision the last few years of Jason Kelce's career, and that's real. I mean, we are pretty used to this. It would suck for the Eagles to have to replace an offensive coordinator and a defensive coordinator. But I will say this. If a DC has an opportunity to take this job because Vic Fangio does decide to retire, this is a great defensive coordinator gig. Think about all of the high-level star players that the Eagles have on their roster right now. Think about all of the talent that defensive coordinator would be able to inherit. You'd have an opportunity to springboard your career potentially, become a head coach here soon. Or if you're Jim Schwartz, you leave Cleveland, you get to go to Philadelphia. My goodness, what a great opportunity that would be. You'd go from coaching one of the best defenses over the league over the last couple of years and coaching a player like Myles Garrett to coaching a defense that has Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, a defensive line with Moro Ojomo, Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Jalex Hunt, Nolan Smith, Zach Bond, Jahad Campbell at linebacker. Like, this Eagles defense is extremely good. It's also funny that the Eagles reached out to Gannon and Schwartz, and both used to coach the Philadelphia Eagles. Now, Gannon, of course, went to the Green Bay Packers. He's going to be coordinating that defense under Matt LaFleur. If I could choose between the two, I'd go Jim Schwartz. There would be a change in scheme, though. You know, Vic Fangio runs that hybrid 3-4. Jim Schwartz runs a 4-3, and he runs the wide 9. Now, that leads to a lot of pass rushing production, and I think that a lot of these Eagles players up front would be able to pin their ears back and get after the quarterback, but Jalex Hunt and Nolan Smith have been stand-up pass rushers. They'd have to get into a 3-point stance or a 4-point stance, most likely, if they want to play in Jim Schwartz's scheme. The other thing, too, is that the Eagles do run a mix of zone and man. The Browns last year under Jim Schwartz had the number 1 man coverage rate in the NFL. So up front, the defense would change for the Eagles. On the back end, though, I'll tell you this, Jim Schwartz probably loves who the Eagles have at cornerback in his defense. Cooper DeJean and Quinyon Mitchell would be great scheme fits for what Jim Schwartz wants to do on the defensive side of the ball. And how about the personality fits that we would see? Jim Schwartz, Nick Sirianni, both very passionate and intense guys. That screams Philadelphia right there. Other internal options, Clint Hurtt is the Eagles defensive line coach. He was the defensive coordinator for the Senior Bowl over the last several days. Joe Kasper got promoted from safeties coach to cornerbacks coach and pass game coordinator to take over for Christian Parker. Joe Kasper was with the Eagles in 2021 and 2022 under Jonathan Gannon. They're best friends. He went to the Miami Dolphins to coach under Vic Fangio in 2023 and then came back to the Eagles the last 2 years because Fangio wanted him back. And Joe Kasper has said, I want to learn under Vic Fangio. I've had opportunities, but I want to learn under Fangio's watch. So that could be an internal candidate. Clint Hurtt was a DC before. He has done an incredible job with this Eagles defensive line. He did interview to be the Dolphins defensive coordinator. He's got some Florida ties, but Jeff Hafley's going to call the defense, so Clint Hurtt wouldn't call the plays on defense. The other thing is that Hurtt was a DC for the Seahawks under Pete Carroll. Those defenses were not good at all. Now, it's not to say he can't be a good coordinator once again. Pete Carroll, at the end of that tenure, was a little bit washed, and with the Raiders this year, he was pretty washed. But that would be a little bit of a concern. Another external candidate who would be very interesting for the Eagles is Al Harris. He coached for the Bears this past year. He coached under Dan Quinn for the for the Dallas Cowboys, for a couple of years. He played under Jim Johnson many years ago as a corner, and then actually was a solid player for the Eagles, often penalized, went to the Green Bay Packers, was an excellent corner there. When he's been a coach, his defenses have done a great job under Quinn, under Dennis Allen, of generating turnovers. Plus, Al Harris knows this city. He's had some defensive coordinator interviews, and he's looked at as a soon-to-be DC. That would be another candidate who I'd be interested in the Eagles talking to here. So as of right now, it looks like Vic Fangio is going to come back in 2026. But it wouldn't shock me if he retires. And that's kind of what I've gathered over the last few days, and that was what was reported this morning by Jimmy Kempski. Whatever happens, I'm going to keep you in the know right here on Philadelphia Eagles Now. Appreciate everybody for watching. Again, don't forget to get your Valentine's Day merch. I'm going to throw up the banner once again. Get your lady something special. Chatsports.com/Eagles V-Day. There are sweatshirts available. And then, as I was showing you earlier, there are shirts available for the special lady in your life. All right, that does it. I am flying to San Francisco tomorrow. We'll start doing content from the site of Super Bowl 60 tomorrow and all throughout the week. Be on the lookout for that. Can't wait for it. I'll catch up with some NFL insiders, maybe some celebrities, maybe some Eagles players if they're around. Just bringing you great Eagles coverage. So that's why you hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to give me a follow, and we will catch you soon right here on the Philadelphia Eagles Now.